Usually, when we talk about a diagnosis, whether that's in medicine or fixing a car engine or, debugging code, there's this deep, comforting expectation of precision.
Right, yeah. It's an engineering mindset.
Exactly. Like, you break your arm, the X-ray produces that stark white line on a black background, and the doctor just points to it. Clean, objective, binary, broken or not broken.
Which is the ultimate comfort for the human brain, honestly. We desperately want the universe to be visible and measurable and easily sorted into discrete little boxes.
But the moment you step into the world of human consciousness, that X-ray machine just completely shatters.
Oh, it falls apart immediately.
Right. Try to map out what the mind actually is or where the structure of society comes from or what freedom fundamentally means, and you were just staring into a diagnostic fog.
The binary categories just collapse under their own weight.
Which is exactly why we're here today. Welcome to the Deep Dive. We are taking on a monumental task for you today, unpacking one of the most notoriously dense, unbelievably complex, yet profoundly influential concepts in the entire history of Western philosophy.
Yeah, we are decoding Georg Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel's concept of Geist.
Which is often translated as mind or spirit, right? Though we'll see why any single English word is going to severely shortchange what he was actually trying to describe.
Yeah, translations really fail here.
Totally. So, to anchor this, we're looking at a very specific stack of materials. We're pulling from the text and a literal mountain of critical commentaries surrounding the final part of Hegel's 1830 masterwork, the Encyclopaedia of the Philosophical Sciences.
Specifically, the section known as his Philosophy of Mind.
Right. And our mission here is to reverse engineer the entire architecture of Geist for you. Whether you're a university student staring down a brutal seminar or just a lifelong learner trying to figure out the hidden scaffolding of the modern world.
We're going to translate this super dense 19th century German idealism into tangible, real-world mechanics.
And before we dive in, we have to put a really clear disclaimer on this, right?
We do, yeah.
Oh.
Because we are dealing with some highly charged historical, political, and quite frankly, racial concepts in this text.
Right. When you build an entire theory of reality in the 1830s, you're going to leave some exposed wires. So we are going to impartially report on and analyze exactly what is in the source text, including the modern critiques of his views.
Exactly. We aren't here to endorse or cancel any of this. We aren't taking sides on the politically charged stuff.
Right. We're just exploring the mechanics of the ideas exactly as they operate in the material provided.
Because you really cannot understand the shape of modern thought without understanding what Hegel built, even if you ultimately decide to tear parts of it down later.
Absolutely. So what is the roadmap for this journey?
Well, we're going to start at the absolute bottom, a basic feeling soul that's just a biological pulse entangled in nature.
Okay, starting small.
Right. And from there, we'll watch it awaken, struggle, build societies, write laws, and eventually climb all the way up to what he calls absolute mind.
Which is the ultimate culmination of human self-awareness in art, religion, and philosophy. It's a massive arc.
It really is.
But to understand the building, you have to look at the ground it was built on. Hegel wasn't just writing in a vacuum, was he?
Oh, not at all. The late 18th and early 19th centuries in Europe were essentially this cauldron of cultural and political explosions.
Like, you have the philosopher Immanuel Kant completely rewriting the limits of human knowledge. He basically said, we can never know the thing in itself, which left this massive philosophical puzzle.
Kant created a ceiling, right. And Hegel's entire career was essentially an attempt to smash through it.
But it wasn't just abstract philosophy happening. The geopolitical ground was liquefying too.
Yeah, you have the collapse of the Holy Roman Empire, the messy early stirrings of German nationalism, and, well, above all else, the absolute shockwave of the French Revolution.
I mean, the French Revolution feels like the absolute center of gravity for Hegel here. Because up until that point, you had feudal certainties.
Kings ruled by divine right. Peasants farmed the dirt.
Yeah, the social hierarchy was basically considered a fixed law of nature, and the revolution just shattered that overnight. It replaced it with this radical, intoxicating conception of absolute freedom and individuality.
Right, it was the ultimate assertion of the human will. The revolutionaries decided they could just invent a new reality from scratch.
But Hegel looked at the immediate aftermath. You know, the reign of terror, the endless executions, the total collapse of social order. And he drew a very specific conclusion from that, didn't he?
He did. He realized that abstract freedom, a freedom that only defines itself by what it's actively destroying, a freedom without any institutional structure, Well, it doesn't lead to utopia. It leads straight to the guillotine.
It's the difference between breaking out of a cage and actually knowing how to build a house.
That's a great way to put it.
Like tearing down the cage feels like freedom, but if you just stand out in the wilderness with no shelter, that freedom is completely hollow. It's chaotic.
Exactly. So Hegel is watching this chaos, and he realizes he has to synthesize two completely opposed worldviews that are tearing Europe apart.
Okay, what are the two sides?
On one side, you have the Enlightenment, which is all about the cold, dissecting power of human reason. It's the individual using logic to tear down superstition and tradition.
Right, very clinical. But on the other side, reacting directly against that coldness, you have romanticism.
Right. And the Romantics argue that you can't just reduce human beings to biological calculators. They emphasize deep emotion, community, art, and the idea that we are embedded in this historical flow.
So Hegel wants a system that reconciles both. He wants to prove that individual rational autonomy actually requires community and history.
Yes. And the concept he uses to fuse these opposites together is Geist.
Let's pin this word down. As we said, translating Geist as just mind or spirit doesn't quite work. It seems to operate on two frequencies at once.
It does. It's the individual mind, the software running in your head right now, but it's also the collective historical spirit of an entire culture.
It bridges the psychological and the historical, but the primary mistake people make here is trying to treat Geist like a noun, right?
Oh, absolutely. It is not a static object. You can't isolate it in a laboratory. Hegel defines it as absolute restlessness and pure activity.
Absolute restlessness. I love that. It means the mind is never just passively receiving data. It's constantly churning and transforming.
Yeah, and our sources point out this creates a really fascinating loop. If Geist is the activity of knowing, then philosophy, the study of the mind, is just the mind fulfilling its own destiny.
It's the universe waking up and looking in the mirror.
The ancient Greek maxim was know thyself, right? For Hegel, that isn't just good advice. It is the fundamental ontological law of reality.
Because a rock can't know itself, a tree can't know itself.
Right? They just exist. Even higher animals experience sensations but lack the conceptual architecture to comprehend their own existence. Geist is where the subject looking and the object being looked at merge into one continuous reality.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because to understand that self-reflective mirror, we have to look at what Geist is reacting against.
No.
Which brings us to his concept of nature.
Right. Hegel views mind as the truth of nature.
And the sources say he claims nature is fundamentally characterized by a state of underness, which is just spectacularly dense 19th century jargon.
It really is. The German term is Außereinander.
Wow, okay.
Yeah, it literally translates to being outside of one another. Think about the physical universe. A planet is here, a star is millions of light years away.
A grain of sand is next to another grain of sand.
Exactly. Everything in physical nature is spread out in space and time. The parts are external to each other. They completely lack a conscious internal unity holding them together.
It's pure fragmentation. Like a pile of bricks is just a pile of bricks. The bottom brick doesn't know the top brick exists.
Precisely. And for Hegel, this fragmentation is a logical inadequacy. It's a form of conceptual untruth.
Wait, untruth?
Yeah, he argues that the very concept of nature, the scattered reality, logically strives to overcome its own fragmentation. It strives toward inwardness. And that inwardness, that unification, is mind. Mind is where nature finally achieves being within itself.
Okay, I have to pause and throw a massive red flag here.
Go for it.
Because this is where a modern, scientifically literate listener is going to completely balk. The idea that nature strives toward mind implies a teleological process.
Right, a process with a pre-planned end goal baked into it.
Exactly. And contemporary physics, evolutionary biology, none of our empirical sciences support the idea that the universe has a conscious direction aimed at producing human brains. Is Hegel just projecting human ego onto the cosmos here?
It's a profound vulnerability in his system, absolutely. And the critical commentaries in our sec hit this exact point really hard. It's often diagnosed as a fallacy of misplaced concreteness.
Meaning he's taking an abstract logical idea and forcing it onto physical reality.
Yes, but to understand his architecture, you have to separate empirical science from pure logic. Hegel is not an evolutionary biologist proposing a physical timeline. He's a logician analyzing concepts.
So he's saying that if you just look at the pure concept of fragmented nature, it contains a logical contradiction that can only be resolved by the concept of unified mind.
Yes, exactly. He's treating logical determinations as the fundamental DNA of reality. The system begins with pure logic, alienates itself into physical nature, and then resolves that alienation by returning to itself as mind.
Whether that actually maps onto messy biological evolution is a massive point of friction.
A huge point of friction. But within the walls of his system, that is the mechanism.
Understood. Okay, so we're tracing the logic. Let's trace it from the very bottom, which brings us to section 2, anthropology.
Right. We're looking at the absolute most primitive form of mind, which Hegel calls the natural soul.
And we should clarify, when he says soul, he doesn't mean a glowing orb that floats to heaven, right?
No. He's leaning heavily on Aristotle's concept of the psyche, the animating principle that makes biological matter alive. At this stage, the natural soul is entirely submerged in the physical body.
The text describes it as weaving a somber web in its unconscious and unintellectual individuality. It's a beautifully claustrophobic phrase.
It really paints a picture.
Think of a fetus in the womb or a newborn infant in those first few hours. There's no concept of me versus the world. It's just a blurry continuum of warmth, cold, hunger. The soul is just a passive sponge.
The boundaries of the self just do not exist yet. The soul is completely entangled with the natural environment. And this entanglement is actually where we hit one of the most heavily criticized aspects of the text.
Right, because when Hegel outlines the natural qualities of this primitive soul, he attempts to map geographical and climatic differences directly onto human consciousness.
Yeah, he tries to derive racial differences and even racial hierarchies directly from this supposed logical unfolding.
And the critical sources we have tear this apart, not just as a moral failing of the 19th century, but as a catastrophic structural failure of his own philosophical method.
It is a glaring contradiction. The whole premise of his system is that it's a pure, necessary unfolding of concepts. Logic moving to logic. But geography, climate, race, these are deeply contingent empirical facts.
Right. You only know them by walking outside and looking at the world, not by deducing pure logic in a room.
Exactly. By attempting to jam empirical 19th century prejudices into the foundational level of pure logic, he basically corrupts the machinery of his own system.
He needs the logical spreadsheet to balance, so he forces messy data into the cells even when it clearly doesn't fit. It's a crucial flaw.
Very much so.
But moving past those geographical detours, how does this passive, sponge-like soul actually start to wake up? What triggers the next step?
The trigger is the transition to the feeling soul. This is the initial spark of proto-selfhood. The soul starts to create a microscopic amount of distance between itself and the sensations bombarding it.
So it stops just being the sensation and starts to claim it.
Yes. It goes from a state of there is pain to I am feeling pain. It separates the subject from the object for the very first time.
And the text has a deeply fascinating perspective on what happens when this process breaks down. His theory of madness or derangement is incredibly prescient.
Oh, it's profoundly modern. He doesn't view mental illness as a broken mechanical part in the brain. He views it as a failure of what he calls rational integration.
Meaning a healthy mind can experience a trauma and integrate it into a wider narrative of the self. The mind says, this happened to me, but it's not all of who I am.
Right. And derangement happens when the soul becomes completely fixated on one specific feeling.
The mind gets trapped in a loop. The trauma refuses to be integrated, and it colonizes the entire consciousness. One piece of the puzzle swells up and consumes the whole board.
Exactly. Madness is a contradiction within reason itself. It's the failure of the soul to maintain its sovereignty.
Okay, so assuming the soul avoids that trap, it still has a massive problem. It's still trapped inside a clumsy, demanding physical body. How does the mind eventually subjugate the meat suit it lives in?
Through a mechanism that sounds so mundane but is actually magical here. Habit.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because he calls habit a second nature.
Think about the mechanics of habit. It's taking a conscious, painstaking bodily activity and, through sheer repetition, making it completely automatic.
By making the bodily movement mechanical, the soul basically incorporates the body into itself.
Right. It conquers the physical form.
Let's ground this with a deep, everyday analogy. Think about the agonizing process of learning to drive a manual transmission car.
Oh, that's a perfect example.
The first time you sit in the driver's seat, you are entirely trapped by your physical body. Your consciousness is flooded with mechanical demands. The left foot presses this pedal, the right hand moves this lever, look in the mirror, every limb feels alien.
The body actively resists your will. It's clumsy and exhausting.
Yeah, if someone in the passenger seat tries to talk to you about the weather, you tell them to shut up because your mind has zero spare capacity.
Because your soul is fully entangled in the resistance of the physical body. It hasn't achieved mastery yet.
But what happens after 6 months of a daily commute? You build habit. And suddenly you're flying down the highway at 70 miles an hour, smoothly shifting gears, and you aren't even looking at your hands.
You're probably having a deep philosophical conversation with the passenger.
Exactly. Your physical body is executing incredibly complex tasks completely automatically. The car and your limbs have become totally transparent.
And that transparency is exactly what Hegel is describing. Through habit, the body ceases to be an alien object that you have to fight. It becomes a perfectly pervious instrument.
The body becomes a sign of the soul.
Yes, the habit takes raw first nature and refines it into second nature. And the ultimate payoff here is freedom. Because your body is on automatic, your consciousness is liberated to think and look outward.
That is just a brilliant piece of mechanical psychology. So the soul has mastered the body. It looks outward, beyond its own skin, and realizes there is an entire world out there that is not me.
Which pushes us out of anthropology and into section 3, phenomenology.
Phenomenology is the study of the awakening of consciousness, right?
Right. The soul is now a subject looking at objects. Hegel tracks the evolution of this theoretical mind through 3 distinct stages of increasing complexity.
It's basically the mind continually realizing its current way of looking at the world is flawed, which forces it to level up.
Exactly. And it starts with the most basic way we interact with the world, sensory consciousness. This is pure, naive realism.
It's pointing at a tree and saying, look at this, here it is, now.
But Hegel says this immediate raw sensory data is actually a complete illusion. The word "this" is a trap.
Why is it a trap?
Because pure empiricism tells us we get truth directly from unfiltered sensory input. But the moment you open your mouth to say this or now, you already failed.
Because words like this or now are universal concepts. Like the now I just referred to is already gone. It's in the past.
Exactly. And the word "this" can apply to a tree, a car, or a cloud. You cannot grasp a singular, raw sensory detail without immediately wrapping it in a universal concept generated by your own mind.
The raw object just slips through your fingers.
Right. And this failure forces the mind to realize that things are more complicated than raw data. This forces the evolution to the second stage, perception.
In perception, the mind says, okay, raw data didn't work. I'm going to organize the world into stable objects with specific properties. I'm not just looking at a red blur. I am perceiving an apple.
It's a unified thing, with properties like being red, round, and sweet.
But Hegel pulls the rug out from under this stage too, doesn't he?
He does. The concept of the apple fails because its properties are entirely dependent on things outside the apple. What is redness? It only exists in relation to the spectrum of light and the human retina.
And sweetness only exists in relation to chemical receptors on the tongue. So the apple isn't an independent unity at all. Its identity bleeds out into a massive web of relationships with everything else.
Yes, the surface-level objects of perception are contradictory. To resolve this, the mind has to stop looking at the surface and start looking for the hidden architecture underneath.
Which triggers the leap to the third stage, intellect or understanding. This is where science is born, right?
Exactly. The intellect says the truth isn't the red skin of the apple. The truth is the universal laws and forces acting upon it. We look at the law of gravity that makes it fall.
Intellect maps out the physics and the mathematical rules. But this leads to Hegel's most radical pivot. Let's lay this out carefully.
Okay, so when the intellect maps the universal laws of the universe, when it comprehends physics and mathematics, it realizes something shocking. The rational conceptual structure it's finding out there in the world is the exact same rational conceptual structure that exists inside its own head.
The laws of physics aren't physical objects. They're concepts. And concepts are the native language of the mind.
Yes. So when the mind looks at the deepest truth of the universe, it is actually just looking at a reflection of its own rationality.
Oh, wow. To be aware of an object as a system governed by laws is to simultaneously be aware of oneself as a rational subject.
The mind recognizes itself in the world. And with that spark, consciousness transforms into self-consciousness.
The lights are fully on, I know. But the immediate result of this self-awareness isn't some peaceful Zen state. The text introduces desire.
Right. When the self realizes it's an independent subject, it feels a burning need to prove it. And its first instinct is destruction.
Because the self looks at the external world and says, That world is alien to me. I need to assert my dominance over it. I'm hungry, so I consume the apple. I negate the object to affirm my own existence.
But the satisfaction is temporary. You eat, you're satisfied, and 3 hours later, your stomach growls again. You're caught in a biological hamster wheel.
Destroying mindless objects doesn't provide any permanent proof that you are a truly free being. You need something that can actually look back at you.
You cannot get genuine recognition from an apple. To prove your self-consciousness, you require another self-consciousness. You need another human mind to validate your reality.
Which brings us to the most famous, heavily debated sequence Hegel ever wrote, the master-slave dialectic, the ultimate struggle for recognition.
This sequence has influenced everything from Marxist economics to modern sociology. Hegel posits this scenario. Two newly self-conscious beings meet for the first time. They both desperately need recognition.
But they can't just politely shake hands and agree to validate each other. Why does it immediately have to turn to violence?
Because of what they're trying to prove. They're trying to prove they aren't just animals. An animal is enslaved to the instinct to survive at all costs. To prove you're a free, self-conscious subject, you have to prove you value your abstract freedom more than your biological life.
You have to prove you are willing to sever your attachment to mere survival. So it escalates into a life and death struggle.
It's the ultimate game of existential chicken. They push each other to the absolute brink. But then, one of them breaks.
One of them looks at the reality of death and flinches. They decide staying alive is more important than being recognized as an equal. So they submit.
And the one who chose life over freedom becomes the slave. The one who didn't flinch wins and becomes the master.
On paper, the master gets total victory. The master gets absolute dominance and forces the slave to do all the agonizing labor of surviving.
But here, Hegel executes this brilliant psychological plot twist. The master's victory is completely structurally hollow.
Let's break down why it decays.
Think about what the master wanted. Validation from a free, equal consciousness. But by subjugating the other person, the master destroyed the equality required for meaningful recognition.
The validation now comes from a broken, unfree being. Recognition from a subordinate is worthless.
Exactly. And the master stops interacting with the real world. The master just consumes the food the slave grows. The master's existence becomes stagnant and intellectually dead.
While the master rots in luxury, the slave, who is terrified of the master, is forced to work. The slave is forced to interact with the unforgiving resistance of physical nature.
And it is entirely through this forced labor that the actual magic of self-consciousness happens.
Because when the slave takes raw wood and builds a table, they are taking a concept in their mind and objectifying it in reality.
Yes. Through work, the slave learns the laws of physics, the properties of materials. The slave develops discipline, competence, and true creative power.
The slave looks at the world they built and says, I made that. My mind has power. Through labor, the slave achieves the genuine self-consciousness the master failed to get.
The power dynamic completely inverts. The slave becomes the true master of reality, while the master is reduced to a dependent consumer.
So what does this all mean for the listener today? Let's drop this into a modern scenario. Think about a toxic corporate environment. You have a tyrannical CEO, the classic master archetype.
Right. Ruled by fear, surrounded by yes men.
Exactly. The CEO demands constant validation. Wasn't my strategy flawless? But the CEO's ego is fragile because they know the applause is bought with fear. It's hollow. They haven't actually touched a spreadsheet in a decade.
They're completely isolated from the actual friction of the business.
Meanwhile, look at the interns or junior employees, the slaves in this dynamic. They keep their heads down and do all the grueling work, but over a few years, what happens?
They learn exactly how the proprietary software works. They build relationships with clients.
Right. They acquire the competence. They gain real, tangible power. They reach a point of true professional independence where they could start their own firm tomorrow. And the tyrannical boss, entirely obsolete without the labor of the people they thought they were dominating.
It is a perfect translation of the dialectic. Hegel is driving at the lesson that true freedom cannot exist in asymmetric domination. If you enslave the other, you destroy the mirror you need to see your own humanity.
The only way out is what he calls universal self-consciousness,
where individuals recognize each other as free and equal. My freedom is entirely bound up in your freedom.
Only equals can truly recognize equals, so assuming we have achieved this mutual recognition, this pushes us into Section 4, psychology. We pivot from social struggle back to the internal architecture of the mind.
Hegel maps this out in 3 phases. Theoretical mind, practical mind, and free mind. We've touched on the theoretical side, intelligence developing from intuition to representation, but the bedrock of his psychology centers on the role of language.
The sources emphasize he anticipated the 20th century linguistic turn by nearly 100 years. There's this quote, "It is in names that we think."
Right. Most people believe they have fully formed abstract thoughts floating silently in their heads, and they just grab words out of a dictionary as sticky labels to communicate them. Hegel completely rejects this.
He argues words aren't labels for thoughts. They are the actual medium of thought itself.
Yes. He calls thinking without words a manifest absurdity. Until an intuition is articulated in language, it's just a cloudy feeling. Naming something gives it objective reality in the mind.
The word allows you to manipulate the concept and build logical structures. He even defends rote mechanical memory here, doesn't he?
He does. By memorizing the physical sounds of words, the mind makes the tools of thought automatic, paving the way for pure conceptual processing. It connects back to habit.
Okay, I have to step in and aggressively challenge Hegel here. Does the listener actually experience the world this way? That we only think in words?
It's a huge question.
Because what about a brilliant jazz musician in the middle of a solo? They are processing complex mathematical and emotional structures in real time, but they're thinking in pure sound and rhythm, not English syntax. Or an abstract painter thinking in color theory. Doesn't this extreme obsession with language blind him to non-linguistic forms of deep human intellect?
It's a deeply valid pushback. Modern cognitive science critiques his system on this exact point. Hegel is an unyielding champion of conceptual rationality. For him, the highest truth must be universally communicable, which requires language.
So he views musical intuition as a lower form of processing.
Precisely. The jazz musician might have brilliant intuition, but until they can translate it into a linguistic framework, Hegel thinks they haven't achieved the absolute highest level of self-conscious comprehension. But you're right, this linguistic imperialism flattens human cognitive experience.
It's a beautifully constructed box, but it is a box. Moving on from how we think, we have to look at how we act, the practical mind.
The practical mind is about the will actively determining itself and changing the world. It starts with basic practical feelings, pleasure and displeasure.
Touch a hot stove, it hurts, pull away.
Right. Then it evolves into specific urges. I want food, shelter, companionship. But blindly following urges leads to chaos. So the mind invents the concept of happiness to organize them.
But Hegel has a devastating critique of the pursuit of happiness, doesn't he?
He sees it as a fundamentally flawed abstract project. Happiness tries to calculate a way to satisfy all competing inclinations over a lifetime. But it's a moving target.
The hedonic treadmill. You get a promotion, your baseline adjusts, and a month later you're stressed about the next one. The math equation of happiness can never be solved.
Because happiness is still tethered to our biological animal nature. True freedom isn't just choosing your favorite ice cream flavor. True freedom is the realization of the free mind.
Which is defined how?
As the absolute unity of the theoretical and the practical. It's a will that understands its own nature as a free agent and then practically acts to make that freedom a reality. It wills freedom itself as its ultimate object.
But, and this is the crucial pivot for the second half of our deep dive, that free mind cannot just sit alone meditating on its freedom. An internal feeling isn't real enough. It has to externalize and build a world.
This is the massive transition from subjective mind to objective mind, the realm of society, law, institutions, and history. The first step in building objective freedom is, specifically, property.
This blew my mind. In modern capitalist frameworks, we think of property as an economic mechanism for greed or distributing resources. Hegel says, no, property is the fundamental bedrock of your personhood.
He argues a person only truly becomes a person when they join their internal free will with external reality. When you carve a piece of wood into a chair, you inject the invisible substance of your free will into an objective thing.
You leave a fingerprint on the universe. To have property is to have undeniable physical proof that your will exists and has power.
And this leads immediately to contract, which is the social dimension of property. Two free wills recognizing each other as legitimate owners and coming to an agreement.
It's the mutual recognition from the master-slave dialectic, formalized into law. But what happens when that structure is violated? When someone steals? This brings us to his theory of crime and punishment, which is counterintuitive but profound. He argues punishment isn't about revenge or deterrence. He says it's the restoration of right.
It requires a major shift in perspective. Hegel believes when a criminal steals a car, they aren't acting on animal instinct. They are acting as a rational agent. Therefore, Their action inherently implies a universal principle.
By stealing, their action declares, the concept of private property is invalid, and taking things by force is the new law.
Exactly. They are logically endorsing the deprivation of rights. So how does society respond? By punishing the criminal, by depriving them of property or freedom, society is actually honoring the criminal's rationality.
Wait, locking someone in a cage is honoring them.
Logically, yes. Society is saying, we respect you as a free agent. You established a universal rule that property can be violated. Therefore, we are simply applying your own rational rule back onto you.
It's a dark, terrifying kind of respect. He contrasts this with beating a dog, right?
Yes, if a dog bites, you hit it with a newspaper to condition its behavior through fear. But you don't respect the dog's agency. Hegel says if you punish criminals just to condition them, you're treating them like animals. Retributive punishment treats them as responsible adults.
It aims to restore the objective balance of right. But Hegel knows a society based purely on abstract property rights lacks a soul. So the system evolves into morality and eventually ethical life.
Morality is the internal individual conscience deciding what's good and bad. But Hegel is deeply suspicious of the unchecked individual conscience.
Because subjective morality can decay into empty vanity.
Exactly. If everyone acts purely on private conscience without an objective shared standard, society devolves into moral chaos. The tension between subjective individual and objective universal has to be resolved.
And he resolves it in ethical life, which culminates in the ultimate institution, the state.
And here we hit one of the most controversial pillars of his philosophy. He argues the state is not merely a referee keeping people from killing each other. The state is the actualization, the embodiment of rational freedom.
For modern listeners in Western liberal democracies, this sounds borderline totalitarian. We see freedom as freedom from the state. Hegel says true freedom is only found within the state.
For Hegel, the isolated individual is an abstraction. You get your language, property rights, and culture from your historical community. By participating in the rational laws of the state, the individual aligns their subjective will with the universal good.
We have to maintain our impartiality and look at the historical context here. He was living in Prussia and mounted a robust defense of the constitutional monarchy.
Right. He argued you needed a sovereign monarch to provide the ultimate decisive unity for the state.
It's a brilliantly intricate structure that conveniently, perfectly justifies the exact political system of the nation paying his salary. Critics point out empirical reality seems to be dictating the pure logic again.
Very true.
But his vision zooms out even further. What happens when states collide? This is world history.
Where we meet the Weltgeist, the world spirit. For Hegel, history is not a random sequence of wars. It's a rational process. History is the judgment of the world.
The sources outline he believed the world spirit moves sequentially from east to west, culminating in the Germanic peoples of Christian Europe. Again, projecting his own culture as the pinnacle. But the fascinating mechanism driving it is the cunning of reason.
One of the most haunting concepts in political philosophy. The idea that the world spirit uses the selfish passions and violent wars of individuals and nations as disposable instruments to advance its goal of freedom.
Let's use Napoleon as a concrete example. When Napoleon was tearing across Europe, leaving hundreds of thousands dead, he wasn't doing it to advance the philosophical concept of human freedom.
Yeah.
He wanted glory and power.
Exactly. But the cunning of reason used Napoleon's selfish ambition. The world spirit needed the oppressive feudal systems destroyed so modern rational systems of law, like the Napoleonic Code, could be established. Napoleon was just a tool.
And once the tool has served its purpose, the spirit throws it away. Napoleon ends up exiled on a miserable rock. The world spirit extracts the progress and discards the individual.
Entire cultures are treated this way. A civilization represents the cutting edge for a century, and once it contributes its piece, the spirit steps over it, leaving it to decay.
I have to push back incredibly hard here because the implications are genuinely terrifying. This provides a systemic justification for every horror in human history. War, colonialism, mass subjugation under the cunning of reason. It can all be dismissed as just the price of progress.
It treats the slaughter of millions as just a necessary friction to polish the gears of the world spirit.
Doesn't this teleological view completely obliterate the autonomy and inherent worth of the individual human being?
It absolutely does, and the critics highlight this as perhaps the most damning critique of the entire Hegelian project. It subordinates actual suffering individuals to a massive, invisible historical spreadsheet. It assumes history has a guaranteed upward rational trajectory, which is an article of faith.
It's the ultimate cosmic version of the ends justify the means. It can weaponize historical necessity to legitimize almost any authoritarian action.
The danger is claiming to know the final destination. But eventually, even objective mind history in politics hits its absolute limit. It remains trapped in the dirt and contingencies of the secular world. To truly transcend, the mind has to rise to the zenith. Absolute mind.
Absolute mind is where the mind finally fully comprehends itself in its absolute purity, free from the violence of history. It climbs this final mountain in 3 stages: art, religion, and philosophy.
And these 3 stages have the exact same content. They are all trying to grasp the absolute truth of the universe. The only difference is the form in which they try to grasp it.
So starting with art, how does art capture the infinite?
Art attempts to grasp the absolute truth in sensory material forms. Think of classical Greek architecture or marble statues of Olympian gods. The human mind is trying to understand the infinite, but it still needs a physical block of stone to see it.
But matter is limited. You cannot fully capture the dynamic restlessness of Geist in a static rock. The physical material fails to hold the concept, the statue decays, so the mind abandons physical matter and moves to religion.
Religion abandons the marble statue and attempts to grasp the truth in representational narrative forms. Myths, parables, dogmatic stories. It operates in the imagination.
And the sources emphasize Hegel places a very specific focus on Christianity here as the ultimate religion, specifically the concept of the incarnation.
Right. For Hegel, the idea of the God-man is the ultimate representational truth because it bridges the infinite and the finite. If God becomes human, it means the divine and the human are not permanently separated by a gulf. They are intertwined.
This connects beautifully back to the master and slave. The sources point out Hegel saw this religious concept as profoundly liberating politically. If the divine is intertwined with humanity, then freedom is the inherent essence of every human being.
It conceptually shatters the idea that some people are naturally born slaves and others masters. Freedom is the ontological baseline of the species.
But religion presents this truth through historical figures and parables, which is still a limitation. To get to the unvarnished truth, the mind must strip away the metaphors and leap to philosophy.
Philosophy has the same content as religion, but it grasps it in pure conceptual thought. It relies entirely on the self-moving logic of the concept.
In philosophy, the mind finally understands that the rational structure of the universe and its own thinking are one and the same. The subject and object are perfectly unified. Geist has come home.
And in Hegel's view, his own philosophical system is the absolute culmination of this entire process.
It is a breathtaking, almost terrifyingly ambitious architecture.
Yeah.
He literally tried to explain everything from a newborn baby's feeling to the rise and fall of empires with a single logical thread. But we have to look at the structural integrity of the house he built.
Right. The sources detail some massive foundational flaws. The first is logical historicism.
The conflation of pure logical development with messy historical time.
Exactly. He constantly acts as if actual human history perfectly followed this logical spreadsheet.
We need a concrete example. Think about how he categorizes world history. He forces the incredibly complex, thousands of years-long histories of Asian civilizations into a single childhood stage of development, just so his logic can transition smoothly to Greece.
Real history regresses and fractures. Hegel takes a sledgehammer to historical facts, forcing square empirical pegs into round logical holes to make the math work.
He prioritizes the system over the reality. The second major critique is the denial of contingency.
Hegel's system is a metaphysical version of amor fati, the love of fate. If everything that happens is a strictly necessary step in the logical unfolding of the idea, there's no true chance. A war happens because it had to happen logically.
Let me use a modern analogy to explain why this is suffocating. Think about algorithmic determinism. We are building AI models that map out human behavior and predict our choices.
Right.
Imagine an algorithm so powerful it perfectly maps out every step of your life as a mathematical necessity. If the algorithm or Hegel's system determines everything is necessary, where does that actually leave human agency?
It leaves it completely hollowed out.
It's like Hegel built a magnificent, structurally flawless, philosophical mansion. But you look around, and all the doors and windows are locked from the inside. We can wander the halls, but we can never leave the house.
And that leads to the final critique. If the system claims the absolute endpoint of history has been reached, if absolute mind culminated in Hegel in 1830, Where do we go from here?
It actively limits future philosophical discovery. If the final answer is already written, there's no room for the unpredictable, chaotic evolution of thought that doesn't fit his rhythm.
That is the danger of any closed system. But even with its locked doors and blind spots, we cannot dismiss the sheer power of what he built. He proved we desperately need recognition from others to exist, and that freedom isn't a natural given. It must be fought for and realized in the real resistant world.
And that brings us to the end of our journey today. Let's take a breath and recap this unbelievable climb. We started with a primitive soul trapped in a biological body. We watched it master its physical form through the magic of habit.
We saw it awaken to the outside world in a terrifying struggle for recognition.
We watched that freed mind learn to think in language, build property, establish laws, and construct the state. We saw it navigate the violent currents of world history and finally rise to touch the infinite in absolute mind through art, religion, and philosophy.
An unparalleled intellectual achievement. And as the concluding assessment in our sources notes, to understand mind is to understand freedom. And to understand freedom is to recognize that it is never a gift. It is always a task.
A task. That phrasing brings me right back to the master-slave dialectic, and I want to leave you, the listener, with a final provocative thought to mull over. Hegel proved that the master's freedom is a hollow illusion because the master avoids the hard resistance of the real world.
Right, it's the slave, through the grueling labor of shaping the world, who discovers true creative power and self-consciousness.
Look at our modern era. Look at the relentless drive for extreme convenience. Look at the rise of AI and the automation of everything from physical labor to writing emails and generating art. We are striving every single day to build a technological world where we are the ultimate master, where the machines and algorithms do all the actual labor, and we just sit back and consume the flawless results.
Oh, wow.
But if Hegel's psychology is right, are we actively stripping ourselves of the very work, the very friction, and the very resistance that is structurally required to maintain our self-consciousness and our freedom?
If we outsource the struggle, do we ultimately lose ourselves?
In our desperate rush to avoid labor, are we willingly building a world where we become the helpless, unfree master? Something to think about the next time you ask an AI to do your work for you. Thank you so much for joining us on this incredibly deep dive into the muddy, fascinating, and endless waters of Hegel's Geist. Keep questioning the systems built around you, keep looking for the hidden mechanics, and most importantly, keep learning. Until next time.